The bridge of the UES Audacity thrummed with quiet tension. High Admiral Serena Vale leaned back in her command chair, arms folded, as the message from the alien warship concluded on the main view screen. A towering alien commander, pulsating with rage-induced bioluminescence, had just demanded Earth's unconditional surrender within 24 hours. The message ended with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for B-rated movie villains. Vale blinked once, then snorted. "Are they serious right now?" Lieutenant Jason Merrick, her tactical officer, coughed into his sleeve to hide a grin. "Yes, ma'am. The Zarkith Dominion has formally issued an ultimatum, total surrender or face. Quote, the blazing judgment of the supreme stellar armada of the 7 celestial realms." Vale raised an eyebrow. "That's pretty cute." The bridge crew chuckled. Merrick added, "They also asked us to, again, direct quote, kindly remove our primitive moon-spinning garbage ball from their path." "You mean the International Space Station?" Vale asked, bemused. "Yes, Admiral. Apparently, it offends their aesthetic." "Send them a fruit basket," Vale said, deadpan, "and tell them the view of Saturn's rings is ours. They can shove their glowing battle spires into a black hole." On board the Zarkith flagship, the atmosphere was less comedic. Grand Marshal Cornaz Vrel, commander of the Zarkith Dominion's invasion fleet, was incandescent with rage. His 6 tendrils writhed in outrage beneath his shimmering armor, his semi-transparent skin flushing with violent crimson pulses. "They said what?" he hissed. Subcommander Thasix Clor, a lanky being with twitching ocular ridges, grimaced. They responded with 3 words, "That's pretty cute," and then suggested we move our giant space dildo from orbit. A wave of murmurs rippled through the Zarkith command deck. Vrel froze. "What is a dildo?" Clor consulted his translation device. "A recreational object. Non-lethal. Mostly. Are they mocking us?" "Yes, sir. Strategically." Vrel's skin shifted to a pale, enraged shade of magenta. "They face annihilation and respond with jokes. They're human, sir." "That's no excuse." "Actually," Clor said, scrolling through a diplomatic intelligence file, "it may be the excuse." He projected a hologram of Earth's cultural history. War. More war. Nuclear brinkmanship. Cold wars. Cold play. The footage was chaotic, unpredictable, and disturbingly inventive. The humans have threatened themselves with extinction more times than any species we've observed, Clor continued. Their own planet is a cautionary tale. Back aboard the Audacity, Admiral Vale was reviewing the Zarkith fleet scans. 1,200 warships. Massive. Glowy. Probably overcompensating. "They've pulled back slightly," Merrick noted. "Now in defensive formation, just past lunar orbit." "Perfect," Vale smirked. "Time to give them something extra to look at." "Walsh." "Yes, Admiral," said Ensign Liza Walsh at the communications array. "Activate protocol, smoke and mirrors." Walsh's eyes gleamed. "Deploying inflatable tanks, holographic cruisers, and fake energy signatures, now." Merrick raised an eyebrow. "We're bluffing." "No," Vale said cheerfully. "We're playing poker, and we've got the face of someone who'd call with a bowl of trail mix and a smile." Back on the Zarkith flagship, panic had begun to bloom. "Sir," Clor stammered, "Earth has just mobilized 50,000 ground vehicles and 5,000 aircraft in 6 hours. They're bluffing." "We thought so, but their orbital platforms are emitting Proximan particle signatures." Vrel paused. "They're allied with the Proximan Accord." "Not officially, but the proximity of a Proximan diplomatic ship to their moon suggests cordial relations." Vrel's eyes narrowed. "And the broadcasts?" Clor switched the display. Clips played from Independence Day. "Edge of Tomorrow." "Mars Attacks." In these simulations, Clore whispered, humans defeat aliens constantly. Training footage? Vrel asked, horrified. More like imaginative rehearsals, Grand Marshal. They've been preparing for this moment their whole lives. On the Audacity's bridge, Vale was watching as the Zarkith ships slowed their posture, no longer in attack formation. Well, she said, sipping her coffee, looks like they're finally doing some homework. They're scanning us from every angle. Merrick said, let them. And while they're at it, send them a new message. Yes, ma'am. What do you want it to say? Vale leaned back, her smile devilish. Just 3 words. She raised her mug. That's pretty cute. Grand Marshal Cazel's translucent appendages twitched as he replayed Earth's message once again. The words echoed through the control chamber of the Zerlin Empire's flagship. That's pretty cute. His second-in-command, Sub-Marshal Vexler, stood rigidly by the Grand Marshal's side, his 6 eyes glancing nervously between Cazel and the rest of the stunned crew. The chamber, usually filled with silent discipline, was now thick with confusion and the awkward processing of a cultural insult that none of them truly understood. They said what? Cazel barked, his chromatophores flashing with humiliation. Vexler cleared his throat. That was the entirety of their response, sir. And then they requested we kindly move our giant space object out of the way of their view of Saturn. A murmur spread among the crew. One officer hastily activated a translation enhancement module, his eyes going wide as the subtext of Earth's message became painfully clear. Cazel's central eye narrowed. Do they not comprehend the gravity of their situation? We possess a fleet of 3,000 warships. Our smallest frigate could incinerate their largest metropolis. Vexler hesitated. Respectfully, Grand Marshal, we may have underestimated them. Cazel turned slowly toward him, bioluminescent skin darkening. Explain. The Sub-Marshal gestured toward the holographic display. Images of Earth's military progress flickered to life. Our invasion plans are based on intelligence from 70 Earth years ago. Back then, their most advanced aerial vehicle was a primitive combustion-based jet. However, last week, one of our scouts observed a hovering craft reverse-engineered from our own downed scout ship from the New Mexico incident. Cazel's gaze bore into the images. The craft was sleek, angular, and hovered without visible propulsion. How long have they had this technology? Over 80 years. And they've been improving it. Rapidly. Cazel waved a tentacle dismissively. Perhaps it's time to gather updated intelligence before we proceed. Back aboard the UES Audacity, Admiral Serena Vale sipped her coffee as the alien fleet retreated to just beyond lunar orbit. Well, she said, I think we got their attention. Walsh, anything on the scanners? Communications Officer Walsh, a woman whose ponytail could cut glass, turned from her console with a grin. No direct reply, Admiral, but their sensor activity has increased tenfold. They're scanning every square kilometer of Earth and our orbital platforms. Let them scan, Vale said, rising from her chair. Let's give them a little something extra to chew on. Harrison, initiate protocol, smoke and mirrors. Lieutenant Harrison raised an eyebrow. Inflatable tanks and holographic fleet illusions. Vale smirked. Psychological warfare, my favorite kind. On the Zerlin flagship, Vexler's scans returned anomalous results. This can't be right, he murmured, running a third pass. Cazel hovered behind him. What is it now? Within the last 6 hours, Earth has mobilized over 50,000 armored ground vehicles and over 5,000 aircraft. Their orbital platforms show signs of particle beam weapon arrays. And, he gulped, energy signatures suggest Proxima manufactured tech. Cazel turned sharply. The Proxima Collective is allied with Earth. Indirectly. We've intercepted transmissions indicating Earth has been in diplomatic contact with them. And, sir, there's more. Vexler tapped another control. Images appeared on screen. Human entertainment media, alien invasions, planetary defenses, and humans triumphing through sheer absurdity. Independence Day, The Expanse, Doctor Who, even Galaxy Quest. They've been preparing for this moment for decades, Vexler said. Not through military drills, through cultural rehearsal. Cazel's color shifted to a queasy green. They've been waiting for someone like us. Not specifically us, just someone. Cazel fell silent. His command chamber, once a place of dread and calculation, now pulsed with uncertainty. Perhaps it's time we spoke with their commander. They're already hailing us. Cazel turned. On screen, Admiral Serena Vale's face appeared on the display, brightly lit and positively glowing with sass. Afternoon, Grand Marshal, she said, lifting her coffee cup. Hope you're enjoying our little solar system. Would you mind moving your ship a few degrees starboard? Some of us are trying to stargaze. Cazel stared at her, unsure whether to be outraged or impressed. Vale continued, if you need help planning the invasion, we've got brochures. Very tourist-friendly. Admiral Vale, Cazel said slowly, his voice thick with restraint. The Xerolan Empire has conquered 17 star systems. 18, Vale interrupted, if you count that algae colony you harvested. Cazel froze. How do you know about that? Your neighbors talk. The Proxima say hi. The Arcturus confederacies, watching too. They're very curious how this turns out. Cazel's chromatophores flared. This was no longer just Earth. This was a galactic audience. Vale leaned back, raising her mug again. Looking forward to hearing from you soon. Grand Marshal. Toodles. The screen went dark. A long silence. Cazel whispered, what have we stepped into? Vexler didn't answer. He was too busy trying to find the zillion translation for Toodles. The bridge of the US Audacity buzzed with barely suppressed amusement as holographic images flickered across the command screens. Inflatable decoy tanks deployed in remote deserts. Holographic warships blinked into existence in low orbit. Particle beam arrays cast ominous shadows across clouds. The real assets were hidden, of course, well shielded beneath mountains, oceans, and misfiled paperwork. Admiral Serena Vale leaned forward in her chair, swirling lukewarm coffee in a chipped mug that read Interstellar Threat Response Team, probably overqualified. The smile tugging at her lips was faint, but it was there. Status on the projections, she asked without looking away from the central display. Inflatable decoy Fleet Alpha deployed across 3 continents, replied Lieutenant Walsh, barely containing a grin. We're broadcasting credible energy signatures and minor life sign readings, just enough to make them question everything. Beta is en route to Antarctica. Gamma is on standby for Arctic theatrics. And the tanks, fielded, inflated, sunburned already in the Sahara, ma'am. A chuckle spread across the crew. Vale's own smirk deepened. How's the weather on the moon? Lieutenant Harrison, tactical, zoomed in on the distant Zyran war fleet, now stationed just beyond lunar orbit. Cautious, defensive formation, scanning everything, and I do mean everything. They've pinged a flock of geese flying over Manitoba 5 times. Vale took a sip. Our mighty geese squadrons continue to inspire fear. Then, terrifying creatures, Walsh added solemnly, especially in V formation. The bridge lit up with another soft chime. The alien flagship had adjusted its orbital posture again. More scanning. More probes launched. No weapons activated yet, but the tension between observation and action crackled through every transmission. Vale stood, her boots echoing on the polished floor. She stepped closer to the central holodable and tapped in a new sequence. Dozens of projections shimmered into view, orbital stations, railgun-equipped satellites, hidden underwater facilities. All augmented, all exaggerated. Some were real, others convincingly aspirational. "Do they buy it?" she asked quietly. "Too early to tell," Walsh answered. "But they've pulled back 4 scouting vessels and deployed more long-range optics. That's not curiosity. That's hesitation." "Good." Vale leaned her hands against the table. "Now feed them something weirder." "Weirder, ma'am." Harrison blinked. Vale turned toward the communications officer. "Upload the footage from our 1996 military parade. The one with the hoverboard prototypes and the guy in a Cyber Pelican suit. Make sure the translator doesn't filter out the commentary." "Yes, ma'am." The officer replied, clearly both horrified and delighted. Behind the veil of sarcasm and surreal theater, the stakes were real. The Xyrans had outgunned every species they'd encountered in the last 3 centuries. But they'd never faced a species that treated war as an improv performance, one laced with slapstick, satire, and cultural grenades that exploded into memes. Not shrapnel. Back on the Xyran command ship Crown of Might, the confusion was turning into something deeper. Grand Marshal Castle stared at the newest data report with visible discomfort. "They've deployed over 50,000 ground vehicles in 6 hours, hissed Submarshal Vexler. "Or, at least, what looked like vehicles." Castle's skin flushed a troubled spectrum of yellow and red. "What do you mean look like?" "Well, sir," Vexler hesitated. "Some appear to be air-filled vinyl constructs, possibly held together with duct tape. Others project hard-light weapon arrays, but don't cast shadows." A long silence followed. "They're bluffing," Castle growled. "Almost certainly," Vexler agreed. "But what if they're not?" The question hung there, awful and undeniable. Somewhere deep inside his many-layered consciousness, Castle began to entertain the terrifying idea that the humans' true weapon wasn't their tech, or their fleets, or even their apparent alliances. It was their ability to weaponize nonsense with surgical precision. He recalled their initial response to his grand ultimatum. "That's pretty cute." Now, they were throwing holograms, inflatable tanks, military parades featuring trained ducks, and paralyzing unpredictability into the mix. "Maybe," Castle murmured, "they don't win wars the way others do." "Sir, maybe they don't win with force. Maybe they win by convincing you you're already losing." Back on the Audacity, Admiral Vale returned to her seat and stretched. "We've got 19 hours left in their ultimatum," she mused. "Suggestions?" "Propaganda stream," offered Walsh. "I can compile a 24/7 broadcast loop of Earth's top 20 most confusing and emotionally intense soap operas. That ought to buy us another existential crisis or 2. Vale grinned. "Yes, make it weird. Make it human." The Galactic Council had no protocol for memes. Not that it mattered. Really, Earth had never been particularly concerned with protocols to begin with. Admiral Serena Vale leaned back in her command chair aboard the U.S. Audacity, sipping her coffee as a new wave of chaos hit the interstellar networks. This time, it wasn't a barrage of plasma torpedoes or kinetic warheads. It was a gif of a cat slapping a toaster in synchronized rhythm to the Imperial March, overlaid with the caption, "Earth's official diplomatic response." In the span of 47 minutes, it had been translated into 316 alien languages and reposted across 6 sectors. "Status update," Vale said coolly, eyes on the main screen where the flagship of the Xyrillan Empire still hovered menacingly in lunar orbit. Lieutenant Malik chuckled. "Grand Marshal Castle has requested another clarification of our cultural communications. He's apparently unsure whether the toaster cat represents a threat, a ritual, or a mating display." Vale snorted. "Tell him it's all 3. That should keep their xenopsychologists busy for a few hours. Around her, the bridge crew tried and failed to contain their amusement. It wasn't that Earth wasn't taking the Zirilan threat seriously. Quite the contrary, serious was half the problem. The Audacity was running on full readiness. Earth's defense satellites were active, AI coordination systems humming, and orbital platforms had their targeting solutions dialed in. The real strategy, however, was to make the Zirilan Empire question everything. And nothing sowed confusion like humor they couldn't parse. Far aboard the Zirilan flagship, Grand Marshal Kazel's patience was eroding. These symbols, he growled, gesturing at a looping display of emojis, reaction videos, and short animations of a human in a rubber horse mask tap dancing on a conference table. They mock us. Sub-Marshal Wexler blinked, all 6 of his eyes. Possibly. But there are layers, Grand Marshal. Some of their transmissions seem to carry multi-level meanings. For example, this one, he pointed to a meme of Admiral Vale holding a mug that read, "I survived first contact, and all I got was this lousy invasion." Kazel's facial chromatophores flared with frustration. Is it satire or a threat? Wexler hesitated. Both, perhaps? Their culture operates on duality. Irony, recursive humor. Their communications are not meant to be decoded, but felt like conceptual jazz. Kazel slammed a fist on the command dais. Enough. Prepare to jam their transmissions. We will not be mocked by static and sarcasm. But Wexler frowned. That might be unwise. Other species are responding to Earth's memes. We've detected growing support across neutral systems. The Arcturans reposted the cat toaster video with the caption, "We stand with Earth." Also, who programs this genius? Kazel froze. They're forming alliances with memes. It appears Earth's cultural exports are going viral. Back on the Audacity, Commander Walsh entered with a datapad. "Admiral, you're not going to believe this. 3 more species just signed the Memorandum of Intent to join the Cultural Defense Network." Vale raised an eyebrow. Cultural Defense Network. Walsh smirked. Yeah, apparently, the Proxima Centaur Collective, the Helari Commonwealth, and the Vri have decided that any attack on Earth constitutes an attack on cultural diversity. The Meme Defense Pact, Vale said, setting her coffee down. Tell me the official name sounds fancier. Oh, absolutely, Walsh said. They're calling it the Interstellar Coalition for the Preservation of Humorous Expression and Existential Resilience. Vale grinned. Catchy. Later that evening, Earth's cultural minister held an emergency briefing with the planetary news networks. Humanity has discovered an unanticipated form of deterrence, he said. While our military forces remain prepared, it is our collective absurdity, our unfiltered creativity, and our willingness to make fun of our own apocalypse that has unified entire sectors. When asked what message they would send next, the minister simply replied, "We're working on a musical." Back aboard the Zirilan warship, Kazel reviewed the incoming requests from his empire's outer colonies, requesting access to Earth's cat database. What is a TikTok, and why do our youth refuse to speak anything but meme? Please advise on the diplomatic implications of rickrolling an envoy. He groaned. We came for conquest, and they gave us chaos. Wexler's head tilted thoughtfully. Maybe they've already conquered us, sir. With Wi-Fi. Grand Marshal Kazel sat in brooding silence aboard the Zirilan flagship Dread Incisor, his 6 eyes locked on the cultural analysis reports flickering across the holographic table. Around him, his command staff hovered uneasily, their chromatophores flashing with nervous gradients of blue and gray. Something about the humans was off, not threatening, exactly, not yet, but unpredictable, uncalculated. Explain again, Kazel said slowly, How a species that didn't have orbital propulsion a century ago is now defending their planet with inflatable tanks and broadcasting synchronized dance routines as a form of psychological resistance. Vexler, his intelligence officer, twitched. It's difficult to parse their intent, sir. We initially believed the humans were attempting to stall for time. Now we're not so certain. They sent us cartoons. Vexler. Yes, Grand Marshal. And a bottle of fermented grain alcohol. A beverage they call whiskey. Castle narrowed. His central, a bribe. A cultural offering, sir. According to the data chip, enclosed, it is both a weapon and a medicine depending on dosage and context. They consume it willingly. Castle tapped a clawed finger against the table, then gestured. Bring me the whiskey. Moments later, an armored aide placed the dark glass bottle reverently before him, along with 2 crystalline drinking vessels. The label was archaic, printed, not holographic, featuring a snarling bear in a hat and words in rugged human script, Frontier's Wrath, aged 25 Earth years. It smells flammable, Castle observed. Vexler nodded. It is, sir. Castle poured a measure, lifted the glass, and sniffed cautiously. Then, in an act of bold defiance, or perhaps curiosity, he drank. The reaction was immediate. His limbs twitched. His chromatophores flared white. His breathing pattern doubled. Then, slowly, deliberately, he set the glass down. I see why they sent this. Vexler tilted his head. Sir, it burns. It mocks the throat. But there's complexity, memory, rage, victory, regret. Castle stared into the amber liquid. This isn't sustenance. It's philosophy. The room was silent. Castle leaned back, talons steepled. We have misunderstood them. Vexler. They are not posturing with their absurdity. They wield it. Just then, a proximity alert chimed. A transmission was incoming from the U.S. Audacity. On screen, Castle ordered. Admiral Serena Vale appeared, seated at her command chair with legs crossed and a mug in hand. She didn't stand. She didn't salute. She smiled, warmly, annoyingly. Good evening, Grand Marshal, she said. I trust the whiskey arrived intact. Castle twitched. It did. And he hesitated. It is complex. Like us, she said. Castle's eyes narrowed. This exchange, your cultural offering, is not military negotiation. No, it's an invitation. She sipped her coffee. You demanded Earth's surrender. We offered you a story, a flavor, and a warning. You're trying to intimidate a species that practices ritual self-endangerment for sport. We invented bull riding. Grand Marshal. That explains the bruising chaos of your culture, Castle muttered. Vale grinned. We're not conquerors, but we're not victims either. We'd rather offer a bottle than a battlefield, but don't mistake civility for weakness. Castle studied her, silent. The bottle of whiskey sat between them like a treaty from another timeline. I have walked among 12 conquered worlds, he said at last. Never once was I offered anything but fear or defiance. You offer theater. Culture, she corrected. We fight with stories, with symbols, with sass. And if you push, yes, we fight with fire. But this, she raised her mug again. This is us warning you in the nicest possible way. Castle gestured to mute the transmission and turned to his staff. She is bluffing, his second-in-command hissed. Perhaps, Castle said. But if she is not, we are looking at an enemy whose primary weapon is absurdity, and who has been preparing for our arrival through decades of speculative fiction and alcohol-based diplomacy. He gestured to the whiskey again. This is not a peace offering. It is a declaration, a message, encoded in fire and poetry. He turned to Vexler. Cancel preparations for orbital bombardment. I want to see more of this entertainment. Vexler blinked. Sir, you can't be serious. They warned us with a smile. Vexler. That is the most dangerous kind of warning there is. Grand Marshal Castle had prepared for war. He had prepared for conquest, tactical feints, orbital bombardments, and ground incursions. What he hadn't prepared for was karaoke night. The diplomatic shuttle had landed 2 days ago on Earth's North American continent, met not with plasma rifles, but with an honor guard that included a marching band and a small child offering a plush toy named Mr. Fluffy. Now, Castle stood inside a neon-lit room beneath glowing signs that read karaoke night, sing like no one's watching, trying to comprehend how this ritual of musical embarrassment fit into Earth's strategy for galactic survival. Beside him, Vexler, his most trusted subcommander, and now the undisputed Zirconian champion of Earth's karaoke league, was attempting to mimic the vocal stylings of a late 20th century Earth singer known only as Freddie. The alien's six-lobed throat managed to replicate the high notes of Bohemian Rhapsody with uncanny accuracy, albeit with frequent chromatic skin spasms. Castle's chromatophores flashed a confused teal. "This is war?" he muttered. "No," Ambassador Serena Vale whispered, a smile twitching at the corner of her lips. "This is culture." They had visited a ballet in Vienna. Castle was stunned to see humans move with such precision and grace, the opposite of the chaos their broadcasts suggested. The next stop had been a demolition derby in Indiana, where humans joyfully rammed vehicles into one another to the cheers of thousands. This appears to be ritualized territorial combat. Vexler had commented during the derby. "Technically, yes," Vale replied, sipping soda from a souvenir cup the size of a small reactor core. "Except everyone goes home at the end. Usually." Then came the Louvre in Paris, a haunting cathedral choir in Prague, a haunted house in Orlando, where Castle accidentally disintegrated a holographic ghoul out of reflex, and now karaoke night, where laughter, rhythm, and utter absurdity fused into what humans called fun. To Castle, it felt like cultural assault. "You confuse me," he admitted to Vale as another human took the stage to butcher an ancient war anthem repurposed as a love song. Vale chuckled. "That's the point. You came expecting war. We gave you interpretive dance and a buffet. Your people are unpredictable. Good. You'll hesitate the next time you think about invading us." At Earth's Cultural Affairs Pavilion, the next day, the Zillion delegation was treated to a carefully curated buffet of Earth culture. Representatives from over 50 nations presented traditional dances, culinary masterpieces, folklore reenactments, and, somehow, a magician who could pull rabbits from hats and flowers from a void pocket. Castle studied it all. The overwhelming tapestry of colors, stories, flavors, and contradictions. The way humans embraced chaos and still managed to unify under a shared experience. No wonder their psychological warfare was so effective. It was their normal. By the time Castle was presented with a box set of the Great British Bake Off and told this was humanity's highest form of televised diplomacy, he was no longer surprised, just tired and slightly intrigued. That night, as he reclined in his shuttle quarters reviewing cultural data, he made a note in his diplomatic journal. "The humans possess an arsenal more insidious than any fleet: inconsistency, humor, and self-awareness. No protocol prepares one for cultural whiplash." When the delegation was invited to a baseball game, the next morning, Castle found himself in the stands, holding a hot dog, wearing a cap emblazoned with a bear wielding a bat, and genuinely enjoying the confusion. They'd served him gourmet delicacies and deep-fried candy. They'd shown him Mozart and mosh pits, sacred poetry and competitive pie eating. Earth was less a planet and more a paradox wrapped in noise, laughter, and the soft hum of quietly calculating minds. And that, he realized, was why they couldn't be conquered. They had no single doctrine, no strict hierarchy of thought or culture. Instead, they had contradiction, unpredictability, and a terrifying ability to turn everything war, peace, suffering, joy into something useful, beautiful, or weirdly marketable. Admiral Vale, he said during the seventh inning stretch, I concede your world is complex. She grinned over a cup of blue cotton candy. You haven't seen our political satire yet. He shook his head slowly, eyes on the jumbotron showing fans dressed as dinosaurs doing synchronized dances. I don't think I'm ready. She nudged him. You'll adapt. Everyone does. And in that moment, surrounded by thousands of screaming fans, ancient snack rituals, and a sky filled with drone-based fireworks forming peace symbols, Grand Marshal Castle, the conqueror of 17 systems, found himself understanding why Earth would never fall. Not because of might, but because it was irreversibly and infectiously absurd. The smell of polished marble and velvet curtains still clung to Grand Marshal Castle's exosuit plating as he was ushered out of the Terran Ballet Theater and into a high-security transport shuttle. He hadn't yet processed the final pirouette of the Swan Prince reimagined, a tragic tale of love and defiance told entirely through a mix of gravity-defying leaps and gliding footwork. The elegance of the performance had unsettled him more than Earth's military bluffs or holographic fleets ever could. How? Castle asked with a dazed tremor in his voice modulators. Does a species capable of that kind of grace also strap themselves to horned death beasts for recreational sport? Admiral Serena Vale smirked from her seat across the cabin, boots crossed, coffee mug in hand, as always. Balance, she replied. You have ballet for the soul, and bull riding for the sheer thrill of not dying. The shuttle descended rapidly toward the next location, an open-air arena carved into a plateau in the Arizona Badlands. Dust devils swirled along the red earth as human spectators filled the stands in anticipation of tonight's cultural demonstration. Somewhere in the holding pens below, a 900-kilogram bull named Diplomatic Immunity was already stomping the ground. Castle peered out the window at the massive creature on the holo display. Its musculature twitched with tension and rage. They willingly provoke such a beast, he asked, half horrified, half impressed. Not provoke, Vale corrected, grinning. Ride. For 8 seconds. Or try to. Bonus points if you don't get gored. The Grand Marshal let out a noise that translators struggled to interpret, part confusion, part admiration, and a whisper of existential dread. It was becoming increasingly clear to him that the humans didn't just thrive on chaos, they curated it, and then charged admission. Down in the arena, the announcer's voice boomed. Next up, riding on behalf of the Earth-Cyrillin Accord, give it up for Lieutenant Helno Kowalski. The crowd roared as a human in a glittering rodeo uniform vaulted onto Diplomatic Immunity's back. I feel I must object to this nomenclature, Castle muttered as the gate flew open and the bull exploded into the arena, launching into a furious bucking frenzy. Vale leaned over, deadpan. Hey, you threatened to conquer Earth. We figured we'd name something dangerous and unpredictable after the concept. Castle watched as Kowalski managed a respectable 6 seconds before being flung into the dust like a rag doll. Medics rushed to the field. The crowd screamed approval. No fatal injuries, Vale said, sipping her coffee. He'll be bragging about that for weeks. The Grand Marshal said nothing. His gaze lingered on the dust cloud and then flicked back to Vale. Your people celebrate failure? We celebrate guts, she said. Success is great, but standing up again after the universe stomps on you? That's where the real applause happens. Later that evening, Castle found himself seated beneath the stars at a formal diplomatic dinner set on a cliffside overlook. Earth's finest chefs presented a 5-course fusion of global cuisine. The alien delegates were served plated delicacies adjusted for their physiology. Castle received a dish with ambient temperature ionized proteins, sculpted into aesthetically pleasing spirals. Across the table, Vale gestured toward the night sky. That's Andromeda, she said casually. We sent a radio poem their way last week. No response yet, but hey, maybe they're still rhyming. Castle tilted his head. You attempt to communicate with unknown civilizations using poetry. She shrugged. We've tried war. We've tried diplomacy. Might as well try a mixtape. He didn't respond immediately, watching the stars with strange gravity in his posture. In the Empire, cultural rituals serve to reinforce obedience and cohesion. He finally said, Your world encourages divergence. We encourage contradiction. Vale replied, It's messy, loud, occasionally terrifying, but it makes us adaptable. It's why your threat didn't break us, and why we served you whiskey instead of fear. Castle stared into his own beverage. An earth drink called kombucha, supposedly alive with beneficial bacteria. It tasted like regret and carbonated vinegar. Vale raised her glass. To contradictions, she said, to ballet and bulls, poets and punks. That's Earth. The Grand Marshal considered her words. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, he raised his glass. To Earth, he said, and for the first time, his skin shimmered not with confusion or alarm, but with something dangerously close to amusement. Grand Marshal Castle sat motionless in his private chambers aboard the Zerlin flagship, the holographic stars of Earth's orbit glinting through the transparent walls. Before him, on a lacquered obsidian table, sat the object of recent planetary diplomacy, a small, round-bodied creature of stitched fabric, button eyes, and a vaguely smiling expression. The humans called it a teddy bear. It is not a weapon, his tactical officer had confirmed. It emits no signal. It contains no surveillance device. It is simply a gift. Castle tilted his head. The bear wore a miniature flight jacket emblazoned with the logo of the U.S. Audacity. It was absurd and deeply disarming. The official human transmission accompanying the plush toy had been simple. To Grand Marshal Castle from the Children of Earth, our softest warrior. Castle had conquered systems with planetary orbital cannons. He had overseen sieges that lasted decades. No admiral, no enemy fleet had ever presented him with something that felt more like surrender via innocence, or mockery, or both. He turned as Ambassador Toth of the Proxima Centauri Collective entered the chamber, his metallic limbs reflecting Castle's shifting hues of confusion and amusement. Have your analysts reviewed the accompanying cultural archive? Castle asked. Toth nodded. Yes. The plush toy is an emblem of Earth's early comfort rituals. The bear is a symbolic defender in childhood, protecting sleepers from imagined threats. Presenting it to a warrior is a paradoxical gesture. They sent me their bedtime sentinel? Precisely. A protector, disguised as vulnerability. Castle let out a deep, resonant exhale. He found the logic maddening. He also found it, in some unexpected corner of his ancient strategic brain, profoundly effective. He gestured toward the table. When we threatened Earth, they sent us weapons. Fake ones. Then whiskey. Then memes. And now this. Toth studied the bears solemnly. You must understand, Grand Marshal, humans have refined absurdity into an art form. They weaponize kindness, confuse with charm, and above all, they never approach conflict on predictable terms. Do you think we've lost control of the narrative? Castle asked, not unkindly. I believe, Toth said gently, they never gave us a narrative to control. They gave us a teddy bear instead. That evening, aboard the U.S. Audacity, Admiral Serena Vale raised her glass in a quiet toast to the bear that stopped a war. Her staff chuckled. One of them, Communications Officer Walsh, had tears in her eyes from laughing. When we shipped that thing with the cultural kit, I thought they'd toss it into a reactor. They nearly did, Vale replied, smirking. But then someone read the tag. They spent 4 hours deciphering our handwriting and historical usage patterns. "Are we really doing this?" asked Commander Price. "Are we about to sign a peace accord because of a stuffed animal?" "Not just because," Vale said, "but it's the gesture, the story it tells. They threatened us with extinction. We gave them plush affection." Aboard the Zerlin flagship, Castle stood before his assembled council. A case rested in his hands. He opened it slowly. Inside, cushioned in velvet, were 3 plush toys, one in a spacesuit, one in a miniature admiral's uniform, and one that looked suspiciously like a blue alien with googly eyes and a sash reading "Best Intergalactic Frenemy." The council stared. "We will not conquer Earth," Castle said. "We will negotiate, but not under their terms." He paused, then smiled, just barely. "We will demand a plush toy for every member of this council." Thus, the plush toy treaty was born. It wasn't drafted in ink or on data pads. It was sewn in threads, and it was pretty cute. Grand Marshal Castle had once laid siege to a fortified planet for 7 years. He had watched stars extinguished by engineered singularities, commanded fleets that spanned the night sky like constellations reborn in fire. Yet none of those campaigns had prepared him for the Great British Bake Off. He sat, posture rigid, in the private observation suite of his flagship's command hall, flanked by advisors whose expressions ranged from stunned to spiritually broken. On the holographic display floated images of human civilians engaged in what appeared to be ritualized cake construction, smiling, sweating, and, most disturbingly, judging each other's pastries with high emotional stakes and refined etiquette. "They're not even soldiers," Castle muttered, incredulous. "They're pastry artisans." "Yes, Grand Marshal," murmured Submarshal Vexler, his 6 ocular nodes still glued to the scene of a contestant weeping as her sponge cake collapsed. "And this is entertainment." "Massively popular," Toth added, his metallic hands folded reverently. "It has become a cultural cornerstone. Humans voluntarily submit to scrutiny, competition, and public emotional display, all for the creation of ephemeral food sculptures." Castle blinked slowly. "They call this stress recreation?" "It would appear so." A contestant was now attempting to salvage her fondant giraffe from sliding off a cheesecake mountain. Tension gripped the room. Castle leaned forward. He was horrified to discover he cared about the outcome. "They are training themselves for absurd endurance," he said at last, "through desserts." "Correct," Ambassador Toth replied. "There is more. They also revere something called MasterChef, in which civilian cooks are broken and rebuilt by fire and verbal assault, then rewarded with celebrity." Castle's colors dimmed in disbelief. "And they subjected this footage to us as a diplomatic overture." "Yes, along with a crate of custard tarts for chocolate babkas, and a pie that, I believe, contains bourbon." The Marshal rose from his chair. "They invaded our attention span." Back on Earth, inside the Cultural Exchange Hub in Geneva, Admiral Serena Vale was trying very hard not to laugh as she led the Zerlin delegation through a cooking demonstration. "You're telling me," Castle said slowly, holding a whisk as though it were a volatile explosive, "that your most powerful social bonding ritual involves flour?" "And trust," Vale replied, gently folding egg whites. "There's also sugar, irrational confidence, and the knowledge that somewhere, somehow, someone else has already failed harder than you just did." The other Zerlins were cautiously attempting to roll dough. Vexler had managed a reasonably even tart crust, though his glaze application resembled orbital debris. Another had accidentally frozen their baking tray with a coolant ray and was muttering apologies to a ruined mousse. Admiral Vale reached out to help Castle as his whipped cream began separating. He looked down at her hands, then slowly stepped back. "No," he said, raising a hand. "I will complete this challenge myself." It was a quiet moment, a ridiculous moment, a historic moment. By the time the pies were baked, none were edible, but the treaty talks resumed the next day with a curious shift in tone, less posturing, more pastry. Later, when the Galactic Council received a formal diplomatic update from the Xyrillan Empire, the transmission included not threats or military movements, but a short video clip of Kazal presenting a slightly lopsided cake with pride to Admiral Vale. The video ended with him declaring, "The frosting is uneven, but it is sincere." The clip went viral in under an hour. Across the galaxy, the phrase frosting over firepower became a diplomatic meme. And on a quiet evening aboard the USS Audacity, Commander Price looked up from a baking tray of his own and muttered, "If you told me 6 months ago that we'd be making peace through puff pastry." Vale, sipping her coffee, smiled. "Sometimes, Commander, humanity wins not by conquering hearts, but by filling them with ganache." Grand Marshal Kazal stood at the edge of the Earth's orbit aboard the Xyrillan flagship Hammer of Ascendancy, arms clasped behind his back, as Earth's vibrant, living marble floated beyond the view panels. The stars shimmered behind it, innumerable, eternal. But his gaze remained fixed on one blue planet that had, against all logic, refused to flinch. The plush toy sat on the command console beside him, its ridiculous stitched grin and shiny button eyes somehow now felt less like an insult and more like a reminder of what had happened and what hadn't. "Status of the treaty delegation?" he asked, his voice calmer than it had been in months. "They are en route to New York for the final ceremonial signing," Submarshal Vexler replied. "Admiral Vale herself will host." Kazal nodded. "And the entertainment broadcasts? They continue to transmit everything, sir. There's a new season of the Great Galactic Bake-Off beginning next week, and the Interstellar Karaoke event has been extended by popular demand." He raised one translucent brow. "Has our diplomat completed their vocal training?" Vexler paused. "They are improving. Slowly." That earned a rare chuckle from the Grand Marshal. "Let it be known across the Empire. The age of conquest is on hold. The age of utterly confusing diplomacy is upon us." The United Earth Assembly buzzed with energy. Inside the UN-like central chamber repurposed for interstellar diplomacy, officials, aliens, and cultural envoys filled every seat. Cameras floated midair, broadcasting the historic event to over 40 systems. Admiral Serena Vale adjusted her dress blues and glanced sideways at Ambassador Toth of the Proxima Collective. "You know," she whispered, "6 months ago, my biggest concern was making sure our fleet didn't run out of coolant in the asteroid belt. Now I'm signing a peace treaty with an empire that originally planned to vaporize us." Toth's four-faceted eyes blinked in asynchronous amusement. "And yet here we are. You humans continue to defy predictive models." The chamber hushed as Grand Marshal Kazal entered, robed in formal ceremonial garb stitched with Xyrillian battle codes, interwoven now with thin stripes of Terran color patterns, blue, white, and a chaotic splash of something suspiciously resembling camouflage. As he stepped forward, Vale met his gaze, unblinking, steady. "You came," she said simply. "You invited," he replied, "with whiskey, plush toys, and televised confectionery contests. One could hardly refuse." They stood across the signing table. A large crystalline slab hovered in the center. Projected above it, the final treaty text scrolled in every recognized galactic language. Vale reached forward and pressed her hand to the scanner first, imprinting Earth's signature. Kazal followed, his chromatic skin pulsing a serene violet blue, Xyrillian for cautious optimism. Applause erupted from the chamber. Fireworks bloomed outside, in low-orbit celebration, glittering over the Earth's curve. The treaty was done. Later, aboard the USS Audacity, Vale walked the observation deck alone. The stars were quieter tonight, less menacing, less unknown. Behind her, Kazel approached slowly. I used to believe war was the only universal language, he said, breaking the silence. Now I'm not so sure. Vale smiled. You just hadn't met humans yet. I still don't understand how you defeated us without firing a single shot. Defeat? She asked, raising an eyebrow. He gestured vaguely toward the stars. You disrupted our momentum, forced us to reevaluate everything. A cultural counteroffensive. Not defeat, she said, holding up her mug. This one emblazoned with "That's pretty cute. Just a better ending." He chuckled, surprising them both. In the end, you answered our ultimatum with a joke. A joke, a bear, and some pretty decent whiskey, she added. Not bad for a species still figuring out what half our buttons do. They looked out at the stars, now speckled with alliance beacons instead of fleet signatures. The Zerillian Empire hadn't collapsed. It had simply changed course. Warships were being retrofitted as embassy vessels. Artists and diplomats now sat where tactical officers once plotted sieges. This could be the beginning of something ridiculous, Vale said with a grin. And transformative, Kazel added. They stood together in shared absurdity. And from that absurdity, peace had grown.